Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Quantum Spirituality on DreamVision7RadioNetwork.com, the show where past spiritual wisdom and present-day science merge to show us our future. Your host is Peter Canova, author of the 25-time award-winning book series, The First Souls Trilogy, available on Amazon, and Peter's website, petercanova.com. That's PETERCANOVA.com. This show is a live video, so if you're only listening and want to watch, go to Peter's website, petercanova.com, PETERCANOVA.com, where you can access his Facebook page to leave comments or questions, and click the D7RN link where you can receive a free gift video.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first broadcast of my new show, Quantum Spirituality, coming to you from sunny Florida. My name is Peter Canova. Please feel free to visit my webpage, petercanova.com. I'll spell that for you. It's PETERCANOVA.com. Now, this is the show where science and ancient spiritual wisdom come together to unlock the hidden mysteries of creation. And before I tell you more about the show and myself, I'd like to tell you why I'm doing this show. As we speak, lives are being destroyed around the world. I'm not just speaking about people dying, but about the depression, insanity, financial ruin, and above all, the fear that's gripping this planet right now. You know, it's kind of scary to think all of this grief has been caused by something so small we can't even see it with a naked eye. Well, this virus really didn't arrive on its own, folks. It came from us, from our thoughts, our actions, our behavior patterns, and our attitudes. Now, this virus is not part of the landscape, so what's the end game here? Well, medical science can help, but the track record on vaccines for these virus-borne illnesses has not been great. We need to realize that viruses aren't the only thing exerting an invisible force in us. Now, our world is permeated by invisible forces that created our universe, both positive and negative forces that shaped our lives, mostly beyond our conscious recognition. And the operative word here is conscious or consciousness. That's largely what this show is about. Understanding that the root of our consciousness is an intelligent force that controls all things in life. Now, bringing it back to the current health crisis, the best vaccine we have is our own minds. If we understand how consciousness operates from its very source on down to our personal lives, we can handle this current crisis with much greater understanding and certainly much less fear. So the best way to strengthen our minds and immune systems and to inoculate ourselves against illnesses is to understand the forces that affect us and acquire a platform of awareness, not built on blind faith, but built on the knowledge and experience of these higher energies, and then learning how they can work either for us or against us. And we're going to start with the proposition that our material universe is not the ultimate reality. It's actually the end product of an interconnected chain of realities and higher forces that can help us explain the inexplicable and achieve the undoable. Now, grounded in this realization, we can avoid a lot of dead ends and deal with what's eternal and real, not what's limited and illusory. My goal is to give you deep insights and a conceptual framework of how reality truly works. And I hope to provide you with a context to inspire you for your own personal spiritual practice by getting into the nuts and bolts of consciousness so you can be your own spiritual mechanic and fix your own vehicle. Wouldn't it be nice when we go into the auto shop to know what we're being billed for? Well, if we do it ourselves, then we're certain. So it's really going to be about heart and mind, theory and practice, spirit and science, left brain and right brain, because a balanced approach is the best approach. Now, this show is going to be a little different from many other podcasts you may have heard. We're going to have the guests covering topics and themes like psychic phenomena, dreams, healing, UFOs, but our real objective here is to dig deeper into the forces behind all these phenomena. So you won't get a lot of New Age sound bites and platitudes here. And since we're not practicing the spiritual equivalent of Bud Light, you'll need to exert a bit more concentration, but I think the payoff will be well worth it. Now, the first broadcasts are going to be very important. We'll go through a structured visual exploration covering information about the origins of humanity and the material world, parallel dimensions of existence, the nature of consciousness, and whether we live in a simulated reality like in the Matrix movie. Now, you may be saying, wow, that's kind of abstract and trippy. How is that going to benefit me? Well, life is really abstract. I mean, we didn't really just suddenly appear on Earth one day, right? I mean, we originated from somewhere, somehow, shrouded in mystery. So think of the Hollywood movies where a person wakes up in a locked room with no recollection how they got there. Wouldn't the first order of business be to find out how all this came about? And we can listen to anecdotes and inspirational talks, and those are helpful for sure. But they don't get us behind the scenes. Life is a mystery. And the more of that mystery we uncover, the more we get a grip on life as opposed to life getting a grip on us. So the most personally successful people have developed a philosophy or knowledge base about life that goes beyond working, eating, and watching TV. We have two choices in life. We can live in the basement, going with the flow of our daily routine and having limited comprehension of the world around us, or we can build a skyscraper of knowledge and view the panorama of life from a higher altitude. But skyscrapers aren't built from the top down. They need a foundation. So the first order of business is to connect the dots of spirituality, psychology, and quantum science to give you a knowledge base, a platform, or a framework for recognizing the hidden forces that created and shaped our lives. Now, once you begin to acknowledge hidden realities and how the universe operates, once you better understand the source of your consciousness and grasp the big picture, then we'll bring things down to ground zero. We'll show how you can utilize this knowledge and these forces to improve your own life and propel you to the highest levels of achievement you can attain in this life and hopefully into the next one beyond. So our first shows are about getting some basic principles down. If we ground ourselves with systematic knowledge, diverse subjects such as UFOs, the secret teachings of Jesus, biblical mysteries, prehistoric civilizations, the nature of consciousness, and even the latest theories of quantum physics all become more intelligible and meaningful to us, we might just start to see a pattern to our lives. So today, we're going to focus on ancient mystic wisdom and psychology. Now, subsequent shows will delve into quantum physics and tie all the previous information together into a comprehensive picture. But before we begin, let me tell you a little about my life experience. And I'm going to try to be brief because the show is more interesting than I am, but my journey might just indicate how much your life can change for the better with greater awareness. So I was trained in business and law. I've been a developer for most of my adult life, and I had some stints abroad in the sales and import-export business and even the shipping business. And my brothers and I have developed the entire spectrum of real estate, residential, commercial, and industrial, and we finally settled on the luxury hotel industry. But this isn't exactly the background you'd be expecting for someone to be hosting this show. And that's because something changed my life forever. Decades ago, I attended a course on psychic development. And to my disbelief, I found out I was an accurate medical intuitive. Now, the course had a catalog of people with medical problems that were brought in by previous students, and we paired off with one person holding the information cards and the other person giving the readings. The only information we were given was the subject's name, age, and address, and no prompting by our partner was allowed. And I remember my first case pretty vividly. It was an elderly gentleman from Miami. And I saw a mental image of him, his body, and my attention went to his heart. And I said he appeared to have a heart problem, like a blockage in his aorta. But I also saw what appeared to be a foreign object there, and I said that it was a pacemaker. Now, they asked me what year the pacemaker was installed, and I said 1965, which was 10 years prior to the current year. And all these answers were spot on. I soon became a highly active medical intuitive. And as word spread, I had a constant flow of people as a student in my working class Boston neighborhood seeking me out. But this crack opened up the floodgates of my intuition. So remote viewing, psychometry, precognition, all these other psychic phenomena became routine occurrences in my life. And I was really perplexed. But one thought came through to me crystal clear. If I could derive information about people and things through my mind, all things must be connected at some higher level of being beyond the material realm of the five senses. Now, being a Capricorn, I really needed to understand the nuts and the bolts behind the operation of these forces. So I took to studying ancient mystic wisdom, and soon after that, quantum physics, which seemed to be the logical alternative to find out what some of these mysteries were about. And I also wanted to balance the intuitive and the analytical side of studying these things to seek answers to the fundamental questions of life. And inspired by my experiences and with no prior training, I then wrote a fictional trilogy called the First Souls Trilogy to share the information that I had learned. And the series went on to win 25 major literary awards and seemed on its way to a TV series before COVID hit and halted productions worldwide. Hopefully one day that situation will be changed and, you know, we might see something on television. But a quick word about today's visual presentation that you're shortly going to see. Now, some parts of this may seem fantastic or abstract to you, but understand we're delving into deep mysteries. Like detectives in a novel, we're gradually putting pieces of a puzzle together before we can get the whole picture. So I urge you to take notes, and the archived shows will be available from my website by hitting the Dream Visions 7 link if you need to review the material. But I promise you all the dots will get connected if you exercise a bit of patience and concentration. So one final thought before we begin the presentation. You know, once people thought the Earth was flat, but Magellan saw Earth's shadow on the moon and knew it was round. Once people thought the world was matter, but Einstein saw the light and knew it was energy. My goal for this show is to help you look through the shadows with the light of your open mind so that we can all be Magellans and Einsteins, not modern day flatlanders. So with that said, let's get into our visual presentation on ancient spiritual wisdom. From the dawn of history, a tradition concerning the mystical origins of humanity existed. Eventually, it spread to every culture and every land and became the universal spiritual tradition. Sometimes it's called the perennial philosophy. And it had variations, but we can identify the basic common principles as it would have existed in every culture of that age. And the first thing is that consciousness is the only energy and substance that exists, though it projects itself as polar forces called male and female. And the phenomenal world in which we live is not fundamental, but it is the projected reality of a higher order. Another precept is that light is intelligence. Light energy is the vehicle by which consciousness manifests itself. Humans are multidimensional creatures. We have a true self consisting of existing parts of a master consciousness and a projected ego of self-limited awareness residing in physical forms. That's us. Now, no separation truly exists between human souls and God or the supreme consciousness. The separation is an illusion of the mind that can be corrected. Using intuition, imagination, knowledge, intention, and faith in a balanced manner allows one to break out of space and time and history to acquire enlightened information from higher dimensions beyond space-time. And finally, they believed that the primary purpose of each person is to reawaken to the higher consciousness within and recognize the illusory nature of material experience. Humans possess the capacity to transcend the ego illusions of time, space, and history and reawaken to the higher conscious unity of all things by gaining knowledge or direct experience of their own hidden higher state of being. Now, what were the roots of this mystical knowledge? Well, the earliest traces that we can find were in the shamanic cultures that existed before 12,000 BC. And the shamans believed that there were two worlds existing side by side, one visible, one invisible. And the shaman was the person who walked between them. Then came the era of the goddess worship, because the ancients believed that humans were descended from a feminized aspect of the divine. And eventually the knowledge was systematized in what became known as the mystery schools. And finally, around 500 BC to 400 AD, we have the Gnostics, who were one of the later mystery schools. This is the group that we're going to be zeroing in on today. And they were ultimately destroyed by the rise of Orthodox Christianity, something that we'll touch on in the coming slides. So you can think of these ancient mystery schools as Ivy League network that stretched from all the way from India to the British Isles. And their purpose was to transmit mystical light knowledge to the adepts. And these spiritual academies, in effect, taught mathematics, philosophy, harmonics, and geometry. Now, what made the Gnostics so interesting in particular were that they were centered in the city of Alexandria, Egypt, which was kind of a melting pot of all the influences of the various mystery schools. You have the Hindus, Persian Zoroastrians, Judaism, Hermeticism from Egypt, and even Greek philosophy, all entering into the Gnostic teachings. And the great thing about the Gnostics was that out of all the different mystery cults, they were probably the most pre-scientific, or had the most pre-scientific and psychological insights that would really make sense in modern times, as we're going to see. So the core principle of the universal mysticism was that consciousness is the only thing that truly exists, and everything from invisible energies to materialized objects like ourselves in a 3D universe and physical bodies are manifestations of this consciousness. And it started with a supreme or a master consciousness that you can call God, the One, the Source, or any other name that makes you comfortable. Now, this static consciousness divided itself and projected other points of consciousness from itself to experience individuality, change, and know itself from multiple viewpoints. But there was a problem, kind of a paradox, if you think about it. If consciousness is everything, how can it experience anything outside of itself? Well, the only possible way to do this was by limiting or contracting its consciousness to create beings that could think of themselves as individuals from a perspective of their own limited or narrowed point of view. In other words, the supreme being had to kind of go into a state of amnesia to create these points of consciousness that thought of themselves or could perceive themselves as individuals. So certain dimensions or zones of conscious vibration formed in a kind of funneling down effect. The farther away from the source, the less conscious were the projected beings. So higher spirit consciousness was closely tied to the movement and will of the source. And the psychic consciousness went even farther afield to experience individual will. And finally, material consciousness in physical form was the ultimate expression of separation from the source, to experience an entirely different state of energy called matter. Now, here we see this process in more detail. The unknowable source manifested itself by dividing into polar forces called male and female. And it was the action between these forces that produced the light, the heat, and the energy to propel creation. And the first zone of creation was the spiritual plane. And the beings of this plane were called AEONS, AEONS, meaning eternities in Greek. And they're similar to the archangels of Judeo-Christianity. But collectively, what you see here was called the higher dimension. And at the edge of this dimension was a mysterious border zone called chaos, or the shadow. And you can think of this as the unconscious mind of God, or the unconscious mind of the source. It was dormant and it was unordered, but it was a source of potential for random possibilities to come. It wasn't a void, but it contained proto-matter, or the potential substance that formed the lower psychic dimensions that came after it, a form of finer matter than the gross matter that we experience. And later, the material plane flowed from this psychic plane, the psychic plane that you can see here, and then the material plane came afterwards. And it was said in the texts that when these lower planes were produced, they were of such a different energy vibration that they couldn't coexist with spirit. So they were expelled in a great upheaval, which really was the equivalent of the Big Bang, and they were projected apart into other dimensions. So here collectively we have the scheme of the spiritual, the psychic, and the physical dimension of matter. Now, this whole question of the eons, or these spiritual beings, we have to delve into a little bit, because the aeons were actually archetypes, what's known as archetypes, or blueprints of all of the aspects that we think of not only in ourselves, but we think of as belonging to the higher power. So the eons had names like faith, wisdom, grace, mind, love, will, mercy, and intention. And they were one entity, but they contained two aspects, male and female. And these architects were, these archetypes were actually blueprints from higher dimensions that expressed into human emotions and human feelings, that such we see here that the divine archetype of love would express as the feeling or intention of love in a human person. So we have the central story of how all this came about. And the Gnostic creation story is one of the richest stories in terms of symbology of any creation story of any spiritual tradition out there. Now, it started with an aspect of God, an eon, called Sophia, which in Greek means wisdom. And so Sophia was the aspect of God that was wisdom. And Sophia had this desire to create on her own in the manner of the source. And in order to do this, she looked around and she saw chaos. She gazed into chaos. And she saw it was a realm of potential where something that new might occur, something, some place where she could create. And so she plunged her entire divine energy into this chaotic realm. Well, the result was something unforeseen, because the proto-matter that was in this realm, the pre-existing seeds of matter that were present there, flocked around her like iron filings might flock around a magnet. And they engulfed her. And actually, we'll get into this in the quantum physics section, but this is really a very clear description of the action of the God particle, because what happens to Sophia is that her divine energy starts to slow down and it starts to congeal, and she starts to take on the qualities of matter. She's losing her high spiritual light energy, and she's becoming something of a grosser substance. Now, this is not the matter that we know of, the physical matter that comprises the material universe. This is a finer form of a subtle matter that really became present in the psychic dimension. And the whole scheme of things that happened was that you have the spiritual dimension, which was many minds in unity. And then because of Sophia's actions, plunging into chaos and producing this new thought or this new energy of many minds in disunity with the whole. This was the first expression of individuality. And you have the psychic dimension, which came into being, and that was soul mind. Now, souls, contrary to spirits, and there is a difference, Souls are those spirits seeking individual expression, using their will to seek their own individual expression. Spirits, on the other hand, use their wills to stay in harmony with the source. So Sophia, looking to do something on her own, plunged into chaos. This psychic dimension formed as a result. Soul mind came into being, and so did this new form of matter, which we can call dark matter, which was a kind of subtle, fine matter that later on was used to produce the gross material world. And the material world really is many minds in physical forms. This is extreme individuality. So the further away that you get from the source, obviously you're seeing more extreme individuality, from individuality of mind to individuality of mind and body. This diagram here represents the thought patterns that would have prevailed within each dimension. So in the spirit dimension, the primary thought would be, I am myself. They had individuality, but I am also the one, because they use their will to stay in harmony with the will of the one. In the psychic dimension, or the soul conscious dimension, you have I am separate mind self from the one. And finally, in the material dimension, I am separate mind self and body self from the one. So that you can see the tone of the thought vibration started to lower with each successive iteration of these dimensions, until finally spirit ended up in physical forms. Now, this is really life by illusion, because you can see that there really is no separation between the lowest form, which let's say would be a human being or a consciousness in physical form. There's really no true separation between us and our source, except through the limitation of our own consciousness, our own minds. So we have, in essence, dreamed ourselves into first psychic experience and then into physical experience. And you can see on the left, this was a Hindu depiction of that dreaming into reality. But it's even reached the scientific community, because they have now developed a number of different theories of how the world is a construct of conscious energy in varying forms. And as you see here in the cover of New Scientist, it says you are a hologram. And we'll cover more of that whole issue of the holographic universe and living in a virtual reality or matrix in the next show that we have on quantum physics. So anyway, it was all summed up in a Hindu saying that this world is the playground in which God fools himself. Essentially, conscious life is the supreme being in kind of a state of amnesia or limitation, working himself through physical experience, working itself through physical experience. And Plato's ancient allegory of the cave really sums up this illusion beautifully. And Plato said, look, imagine that there is a cave and there are human beings who are chained facing a wall one way. And there is a fire behind them, and the fire is sort of a false reality, false feeling of that the material world is the real world, and all that these prisoners can see is the shadows on the wall. So they take these shadows to be reality, these illusions to be reality, when the true reality lies outside of this cave. And the cave, of course, is the narrow-minded perception, is the limitation that we have in our minds of what reality is. We're living in a bubble, in effect. So a little sidebar here, since we're talking a lot of Gnostic wisdom here, a little sidebar about the relationship between Gnosticism and Christianity. Gnostics actually were really the first Christians, and Jesus taught a secret Gnostic tradition. So how do we know this? Well, in the Bible, he says in Mark, the book of Mark, that unto you it's given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God, but unto them that are without, all these things are done in parables. So we know that there was a secret teaching going on. And Clement famous early Christian bishop of Alexandria, affirms that by saying that Mark came to Alexandria with a secret teaching imparted by Peter, and that secret teaching was the hierophantic teachings of the Lord, meaning the mystical teachings of the Lord that was only given to the disciples. And that is further confirmed by another great Christian bishop of Alexandria, Origen, who says that Jesus taught his disciples in private, but he spoke in parables to the masses because they did not believe that the masses were capable of grasping this secret tradition. And then finally, we have the Gnostic Gospels themselves, which explicitly have Jesus teaching a Gnostic message that is very similar to what we're seeing in this presentation. The main point being that there really is no separation between humans and God as Judeo-Christianity has it, but the separation is really just an illusion of consciousness. So anybody that's really further interested in studying these things or reading about them, you can read the first two books of my trilogy, the First Souls trilogy, and it covers in fictional form the whole history of the Gnostics and Christianity. And now we come into modern psychology, and something very interesting is that Carl Jung, who is really the father of modern psychology, directly took his psychological concepts from the Gnostics, and he was versed in the Gnostic Gospels. And many of the terms in Jungian psychology that you see here, archetype, anima, animus, the shadow, psyche, imagination, synchronicity, these were all terms that Carl Jung derived from the Gnostics. In fact, when Jung first read the Gnostic Gospels, his comment was that at last I have found friends who will understand me. So we're going to specifically look at two Jungian concepts here of the archetypes and the unconscious. Now, Jung described, just as the Gnostic did, that there are different layers of mind. And if you look at it from the standpoint of the highest consciousness, the purest archetype, that is the true consciousness. When the psychic dimension was formed, that psychic dimension almost was like the subconscious of the higher dimension. It was a diluted archetype. It was not a pure archetype, because obviously limitation to experience individuality means diluted consciousness. So you see these diluted archetypes in the psychic level. And then finally, at the material level, it's like the unconscious, okay? Taking from the point of view of the highest, you know, it's the conscious, the subconscious, and we as humans and bodies would almost be considered the unconsciousness from that point of view. And this is where we find the mixed archetypes, because we're getting the archetypes both from the higher dimensions and from the psychic dimension. So we have both pure and, let's say, darker type of archetypes that manifest. And this is where we have different ideas of good and evil and various shades in between. So Jung said that the collective unconscious of human beings is the repository of our experience. And at the same time, it's the prior condition of this experience. It's an image of the world which has taken eons to form. And what Jung is saying here is that the unconscious has existed from the beginning, and it's the true source of our creativity. But because we've passed through these dimensions of shadow, like the psychic dimensions, we're also dealing with some rather darker stuff that we have to deal with. So our unconscious is kind of a mixed bag that can be either good or it can be detrimental for us. And he emphasizes that in the second quote here on the right, where he says, in spite of its functions as a reservoir for human darkness, or perhaps because of this, the shadow or the unconscious is the seat of creativity. This quote is showing the mixed nature of what we have in our unconscious mind. So we're going to take a break for a minute here, and you're listening to Quantum Spirituality on DreamVision7Radio.com. I'm your host, Peter Canova, author of the 25-time award-winning First Souls trilogy, available on my website at petercanova.com. We'll be right back, so don't go away.
The First Souls trilogy, one of the most highly awarded fictional independent book series on the market, is a grand vision of human evolution. It chronicles the first spirit consciousness to enter the material world in 3 page-turning novels that introduce a new paradigm of reality based on genuine ancient wisdom and quantum science. These inspirational thrillers will force you to rethink the nature of the world in which we live. Visit the petercanova.com website for information and ordering. In a world facing annihilation, a miraculous African nun rises to become the first female pope through a web of war, murder, and betrayal. Loved by some, hated by many, she becomes the deadly target of Islamic terrorists and her own cardinals as she introduces a new vision that will either save humanity or accelerate its destruction. 4 people must race against a nuclear holocaust to learn her astonishing secret. Pope Annalisa is available at petercanova.com, Amazon, and other online booksellers and bookstores worldwide.
Omega Institute, offering workshops, retreats, and online learning dedicated to awakening the best in the human spirit. For over 40 years, Omega has seen more than 1 million people come through its doors to grow, learn, and find a greater sense of purpose. With over 350 workshops to choose from, Omega offers something for everyone. Located in Rhinebeck, New York, just 90 miles north of New York City, Omega's natural environment and quiet pace allow for extraordinary experiences to unfold. Learn more at eomega.org or call 877-944-2002. Again, 877-944-2002.
How did life start on Earth, and why is there so much suffering? Are we living in a simulated reality like the characters in the Matrix movie? Do parallel dimensions exist alongside ours, influencing our experience? What are the mysterious dark energies that penetrate our universe? Peter Canova folds space and time to bring the twin bookends of ancient wisdom and quantum science into a single focal point, answering these and many other deep mysteries of the creation. Quantum Spirituality can be heard every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific on syndicated Dream Vision 7 radio network. See the show where past and present merge to show us our future.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
Welcome back to Quantum Spirituality on DreamVision7Radio.com. I'm your host, Peter Canova, and you can find out more about me at petercanova.com. And please, if you enjoy the show and have any questions or comments for me, please leave them on my Facebook page, Peter Canova Author, also accessible from my website at petercanova.com. So before the break, we were discussing Gnostic psychology and Carl Jung. And Carl Jung collaborated with one of the most famous quantum physicists of his age, Wolfgang Pauli. And the two men were driven together by some very vivid dreams that they felt were coming from some other dimensions. And they wanted to define what these dimensions were. So in their collaboration, they came up with the concept that you've seen earlier, that there is a spiritual dimension and a dimension of matter. And then there is a dimension in between, the psychic dimension, called the unus mundus, which means unified world. And this is where the archetypes were experienced. But that little word you see down the bottom, psychoid is different from psychic. What they meant by psychoid was that these archetypes are actual entities. They are actual beings with an objective existence whose vibrations carry through into the material world. They bridge the spirit and the material world. And these archetypes carry through, as we've seen before, and express themselves as human ideals and human feelings, both of a higher and a lower nature. Now, Jung said, or someone said of Jung, that imagination, as meant by both Jung and alchemists, don't refer to daydreaming or fantasy, but to the perception of this intermediate realm. Imagination is the means by which one experiences the psychoid world. And an important note here, imagination is extremely important. Now, we shouldn't think of imagination as something that's just a flight of fancy. Imagination is actually a tool that we use to experience the higher energies that are beyond our physical senses. Because everything we can imagine already has its existence as a pattern in a higher dimension. So we're just essentially recreating something in a physical form that we have already experienced at some level in a higher dimension. And if you think of imagination in this way, it's an extremely valuable tool to use to contact higher energies and higher experience. Now, the importance of contacting the source of our being is summed up in a couple of different quotes that you see here, separated by 3,000 years. Carl Jung said, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate. The Gnostic Gospel of Thomas says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Now, what that really means is that if we don't make and come to terms with the elements of our unconscious mind to harness them in a positive way and use them, they will come back to bite us in nasty ways beneath our consciousness. And as Jung says, it will often appear to us as fate. But what it really means is that we have not really done a great job of delving into the source of our being to make it work for us. And we can do this through will, intention, and imagination. If we have the will to improve our lives and we set an intention that we are going to use everything in our capacity to achieve a higher consciousness, then imagination is the tool that we can use to visualize what that consciousness might look like. You can call it faking it until we make it, or however you like to characterize it, but imagination is, as we've said before, the gateway to start to experiencing the divine or higher consciousness. So we are really mind energy projections of our own selves. We start off as spirit mind or higher consciousness, coming down to soul mind or psyche or unconscious, and then physical mind consciousness, which is I think I am a body. So as we can see that all reality is really nothing but a construct of mind at different levels of understanding, different levels of vibration, and different levels of awareness. So the main takeaway from all this is that what we think of as physical existence is actually a projection of energies from higher dimensions, where our true selves have dreamed us into physical forms. And the true nature of the divine is like a pure, unpolluted mountain lake. As the water flows down in the stream, it picks up contaminants and becomes increasingly polluted at the lower levels, although the lake above remains pure. And this is how evil exists despite the goodness of our pure source. The source didn't create the mess of human life, we did. How we limited our consciousness through free will to experience individuality and separation from the whole left us to our own devices, and we didn't do so well in many instances. Now, some of you may say, okay, what we just saw was an interesting story, but it's just an intellectual speculation. Well, most major breakthroughs in life start in the mind and progress to experience. And the central goal of the Gnostics was to move beyond faith and actually experience the divine or higher intelligence. The whole creation story of the Gnostics, which you've just seen, validated by psychology, you'll also see validated by quantum physics. And how is this possible? It's possible because the Gnostic masters broke the boundaries of mind limitation to receive information from higher consciousness. For me, and probably for others listening, these things aren't theory because we've experienced the type of phenomena I described to you in my bio. Now, that doesn't make me any kind of ascended master or even anything special at all. It just means that I tuned into another vibration of information superior to the humdrum awareness we're all stuck in. And so can you. The information is like a 24/7 radio broadcast, but it's on a psychic radio, and you just need to tune in to the right channel. But before you do, it helps to imagine the radio, the tuner, and have a theoretical knowledge of radio waves. And if you diligently practice tuning and dialing, one day the clear channel will come through. And in that instance, you'll pass from theory and imagination into experience. If you have the desire and the conceptual framework to direct your imagination, you will get there. And that's what this show is all about. On the next program, we'll show how quantum physics mirrors the spiritual wisdom you've learned today. So be sure to watch us at Quantum Spirituality.
The First Souls Trilogy, one of the most highly awarded fictional independent book series on the market, is a grand vision of human evolution. It chronicles the first spirit consciousness to enter the material world in 3 page-turning novels that introduce a new paradigm of reality based on genuine ancient wisdom and quantum science. These inspirational thrillers will force you to rethink the nature of the world in which we live. Visit the petercanova.com website for information and ordering. In a world facing annihilation, a miraculous African nun rises to become the first female pope through a web of war, murder, and betrayal. Loved by some, hated by many, she becomes the deadly target of Islamic terrorists and her own cardinals as she introduces a new vision that will either save humanity or accelerate its destruction. 4 people must race against a nuclear holocaust to learn her astonishing secret. Pope Annalisa is available at petercanova.com, Amazon, and other online booksellers and bookstores worldwide.
What if dreams can diagnose your life? What if we can meet the love of our life in dreams? Join host Kat O'Keefe Canova, the #1 internationally best-selling author of Dreams That Can Save Your Life, written with Duke University medical doctor Larry Burke. Dreaming Healing is where we'll explore dreams, research, and interpret dreams from you, the caller. Dreaming Healing shows can be heard every Tuesday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, with live shows on the first and third evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific Time on syndicated Dream Vision 7 radio network. Come live your dreams out loud with Kat.
How did life start on Earth, and why is there so much suffering? Are we living in a simulated reality like the characters in the Matrix movie? Do parallel dimensions exist alongside ours, influencing our experience? What are the mysterious dark energies that penetrate our universe? Peter Canova folds space and time to bring the twin bookends of ancient wisdom and quantum science into a single focal point, answering these and many other deep mysteries of the creation. Quantum Spirituality can be heard every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific on syndicated Dream Vision 7 radio network. See the show where past and present merge to show us our future.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
Well, welcome back to Quantum Spirituality on Dream Vision 7 Radio. I'm Peter Canova, and you can find out more about me at petercanova.com. And please remember, if you enjoy this show, that you can leave comments on my Facebook page, Peter Canova Author, which is available through a link on my website. In closing, I just want to cover something that a lot of people have asked me about. There is a real gap today between materialistic science and what I call more advanced quantum science. Materialistic science has taken the point of view that we were somehow these organisms that were swimming around in some pond that collectively got more complex and eventually built our way up to sentient life that we know today. They've never been able to explain how inorganic matter became organic, let alone sentient. So those theories have been very inconclusive and honestly not very convincing. Quantum science today is really leaning towards the fact that consciousness may have been the basis for all life, which is really the presentation that you just saw, that life is a top-down process, beginning with consciousness and ending with matter, rather than a bottom-up process starting with matter and somehow ending with consciousness. By the same token, there is a distinction or a gap between new spirituality and traditional religion. And traditional religion says that, we had this God separate from us that waved his hand and created us out of the dust of the earth. Like little wind-up dolls bouncing around this lunatic asylum down here, and we did something to tick God off, and now we're forever working to get back in God's good graces. And all of that assumes that we're these separate creations or separate creatures. But again, what you've seen today tells us that is not the case. There is no separation between the source or God and us or any sentient being. We're just simply not recognizing what we are, because the price of being limited into being individuals and experiencing materiality was foregoing large chunks of our consciousness. So you really have today, and what this show a lot is speaking to, is the fact that advanced quantum science is starting to supersede traditional materialistic science, and recovered ancient spirituality is starting to supersede dogmatic religion to give us a picture of a unity that runs throughout life. There's a thread that runs throughout life that connects us all, and that thread is consciousness, except that we're only aware of it to varying degrees, depending upon individuals, depending upon circumstances. But at some level, we are all the same. We are a unity. We came from the same source. We came from the same place, and that's where we're going to end up. And a lot of what this show is about is just about helping us get there through the doors of quantum science and through the doors of ancient spiritual wisdom. So I hope you all stay tuned. And as I said, our next segment will cover more of the quantum physical side of the equation. And until next time, please stay mindful and stay tuned. Thanks very much.
This ends today's segment of Quantum Spirituality, the show where the past and present merge to show us our future. Join us the first Tuesday of each month for cutting-edge information and informative new episodes. This show will be archived on the Quantum Spirituality Dream Vision 7 Radio Network website page, also accessible at petercanova.com. That's petercanova.com.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.